Saved by the Bell. The real story of Victorian death coffins. The phrase, "saved by the bell," sounds like a lucky break, right? A last-second escape from disaster. And you've probably heard the spooky story that it comes from Victorian coffins, rigged with bells in case you were buried alive. Well, what if I told you that origin story is a ghost story? A fantastic, terrifying myth that has completely overshadowed the truth. Because the real story isn't about where the phrase comes from. It's about why people were so desperate to believe it. This is the history of a paralyzing fear, a collective panic over being buried alive, and the bizarre, desperate inventions designed to give the dead one last chance to scream for help. Section 1. The ultimate fear. Just imagine it for a second. A grim-faced doctor declares you dead. Your family weeps as the world moves on without you. But you are still in there, aware but trapped inside a body that won't move. You can't speak, can't scream, as they dress you in your Sunday best, seal you in a wooden box, and lower you into the cold, dark ground. This nightmare has a name: taphophobia. And back in the 18th and 19th centuries, it wasn't just a rare phobia. It was a full-blown cultural panic. And honestly, it was a shockingly rational fear to have. Medicine was, to put it lightly, not great. Doctors had very few reliable ways to confirm death. Stethoscopes were brand new and primitive, meaning the line between a deep coma, a medical condition like catalepsy, and actual death was terrifyingly thin. Sometimes the only way to be sure someone was truly gone was to wait for the smell. Think about that. Your most reliable diagnostic tool was decay. This anxiety was everywhere. On his deathbed in 1799, George Washington's last words were an order to his secretary not to have him entombed for at least 3 days. Even Edgar Allan Poe, the master of the macabre, wasn't just making things up with stories like the premature burial. He was tapping into a very public, very real fear. His horror fiction felt like fact because for so many people, it was an entirely possible fate. Section 2. The terrifying truth. This Victorian obsession wasn't just paranoia. It was fed by a constant stream of sensational newspaper headlines and chilling anecdotes. Reports circulated of exhumed coffins with scratch marks on the lid, torn burial shrouds, and bodies twisted into unnatural positions. A New York Times article from 1885 described a man named Jenkins, whose body was found turned completely over in his coffin. His hair pulled out, and the wood gouged by his fingernails. Some of the stories that made the rounds were even more harrowing. In 1822, a German shoemaker was buried, but as the gravedigger threw the last shovelfuls of dirt, the mourners heard a faint knocking from below. They frantically dug him up and found him alive, with his arms raised. He lived for a few more days, but for a short time, he had been conscious inside his own grave. Then there's the haunting tale of Anna Hockwalt of Ontario. In 1884, she was pronounced dead and laid to rest. Shortly after, others who'd had a similar sleeping sickness started waking up. Horrified, her family had her body exhumed. They found the inside of the coffin was a scene of a desperate struggle. Anna had woken up, only to die a second, much more terrible death. These tales fueled the fire. An English reformer named William Tebb became so obsessed with the topic that he co-founded the London Association for the Prevention of Premature Burial. He claimed to have collected 219 cases of near-live burial and 149 actual live burials. The fear was real because the danger felt real. Section 3. An age of anxious invention. When a fear this deep grips society, human ingenuity and paranoia kicks into overdrive. If you can't trust the doctors, maybe you can trust technology. And so began one of the strangest chapters in the history of invention, the era of the safety coffin. The first recorded safety coffin was actually from 1792, commissioned by Duke Ferdinand of Brunswick. His coffin had a window, an air tube, and a lock instead of nails. He was buried with the keys in his pocket, a true do-it-yourself escape plan. By the 19th century, this idea exploded. Inventors across Europe and America were filing patents for life-preserving coffins, each more elaborate than the last. The most popular feature by far was a bell. In 1829, Dr. Johann Gottfried Taberger designed the blueprint. He proposed tying ropes to the head, hands, and feet of the body, which all ran up through the coffin lid to a bell above ground. A cemetery watchman was supposed to listen for rings. If he heard one, he could pump fresh air into the coffin with a bellows while he frantically dug for a rescue. Other inventors added their own flair. Franz Wester's 1868 patent featured a tube that let the watchman peer down at the face of the corpse to check for signs of life. It also included a built-in ladder for self-rescue. Talk about full service. Some designs even had feeding tubes. These weren't just drawings. Inventors would publicly demonstrate their coffins by being buried alive, emerging an hour later to the cheers of a very relieved crowd. Section 4. The apex of absurdity, le carnice. The obsession hit its peak in 1897 with a device so complex and so ambitious, it was the perfect symbol of the whole craze. It was called le carnice, the brainchild of a Russian nobleman, Count Michel de Carnice-Karnicki. The Count was supposedly inspired after a young girl was nearly buried alive. Her screams only heard as the first shovelfuls of dirt hit her coffin. He became determined to build the ultimate foolproof safety device. Le Carnice was a marvel of morbid engineering. It didn't need the buried person to pull a string. Instead, a glass ball rested on the deceased's chest. The slightest movement, even the subtle rise and fall of a breath, would dislodge it, triggering a spring-loaded box above ground. Like a terrifying jack-in-the-box, this container would fly open, launching a 4-foot-tall flag, ringing a loud bell, and opening an air tube to the fresh air. It even had a lamp for nighttime alerts. The Count toured Europe and America showing off his invention, and people were impressed. He seemed to have finally solved the problem. There was just one tiny issue. During a widely publicized demonstration, one of the Count's assistants was buried, but the system failed to go off. He was dug up unharmed, but the damage was done. It turned out the device was too sensitive. The natural bloating and shifting of a decomposing body could set off a false alarm, making the whole system useless. Section 5. The unspoken reality. So with all these bells, ladders, flags, and air tubes, you have to ask, did any of them actually work? Did a single safety coffin ever save a life? The historical record is brutally clear. No, not one. There isn't a single verifiable case of a person being saved by one of these inventions. There were two tragically simple flaws. The first was the one that doomed Le Carnice. False alarms. A decaying body bloats and shifts, which could easily ring a bell. Any cemetery watchman, hearing bells ring over bodies that were very clearly dead, would quickly learn to ignore them. The other huge flaw was air. Most of the simpler bell and string designs had no way to get oxygen into the coffin. So even if you woke up and managed to ring the bell, you'd suffocate long before anyone could dig 6 feet of packed earth to get to you. In reality, a much more practical solution was used in parts of Europe: the waiting mortuary. Bodies were laid out for several days under constant watch before burial. They often still had bells tied to their fingers, but now an attendant was right there to respond instantly. This simple, low-tech observation was far more effective than any crazy underground escape hatch. Section 6. The legacy of a phrase. So if the death bells were a total bust, what about the phrase they supposedly inspired, "saved by the bell"? This origin story is so powerful and perfectly spooky that it has stuck around for over a century. But here's the truth. Etymologists and historians all agree the phrase comes from somewhere else entirely: the boxing ring. It first appeared in the late 19th century to describe a boxer who was about to be knocked out, but was spared defeat when the bell rang, signaling the end of the round. He was, quite literally, saved by the bell. While the boxing origin has all the proof, the safety coffin story refuses to die. It's lodged itself in our collective imagination because it speaks to a fear that's both ancient and deeply personal. The story of the death bells is a cultural ghost, a chilling reminder of a time when the line between life and death was terrifyingly blurry. Conclusion. The history of Victorian death coffins is a journey into a past ruled by a primal and understandable fear. It was a fear born from the limits of science, fanned by sensational stories, and met with some of the most bizarre inventions you can imagine. In the end, none of them actually worked. The bells that rang were just the quiet sounds of natural decay, not a desperate cry for help. But the myth they created became far more powerful than the reality. It's a testament to the human spirit that even when we're faced with our deepest horror, we don't just give up. We invent, we build, we tie strings to our fingers and hope, against all odds, that someone is still listening for the bell. If you had fun digging into this dark piece of history, be sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell, just in case. Let us know in the comments. What other historical rabbit holes should we fall down next?